Hello, class, and welcome to the second part of our lecture as we delve into the fascinating world of biopsychology and the neuroscience basis of language. Today, we'll be delving into the intricate connections between the brain and the complex phenomenon of language. You need to remember that language is one of the most remarkable and unique abilities of the human species. It's not just a tool for communication, it's a fundamental aspect of our cognition, of our culture, and our corporate and personal identity. So throughout history, countless researchers and scientists have devoted their lives to unraveling the mysteries of how our brains enable us to speak and understand and read and write. So as we explore the groundbreaking contributions of the few key historical figures that laid the foundation for our understanding of the brain's role in language processing, I hope you appreciate how much work has gone into this field. So, without further ado, let's dive in as we explore, first off, the legacy of Karl Wernicke. Wernicke's life really was quite fascinating. He was a Polish-German neuroscientist and psychiatrist from the 19th century whose work laid the foundation for our understanding of language. And his most significant contribution was the identification of a specific brain region associated with language comprehension, now known as Wernicke's area. And Wernicke's work was heavily influenced by his observations of patients with particular language deficits, particularly those with a condition known as sensory aphasia. And what he did is he noticed that these individuals had difficulty understanding language and often produced fluent but really nonsensical speech. And through some meticulous clinical examination as well as some postmortem brain studies, Wernicke pinpointed the region of the left hemisphere of the brain, specifically in the posterior part of the superior temporal gyrus, as the critical area responsible for language comprehension. And Wernicke's groundbreaking discovery challenged the prevailing view that language was solely a function of the frontal lobe and opened up new avenues for research into the neural basis of language. And his legacy really kind of extends beyond the identification of Wernicke's area. His work also provided crucial insights into the localization of brain functions in general, and set the stage for further exploration into language processing and the development of the broader field of neuropsychology. So Karl Wernicke was a profound figure. But someone who was no less significant was Paul Broca. Broca was a 19th century French physician and surgeon who, like Wernicke, made pivotal advancements in our understanding of language processing in the brain. Broca's most notable discovery was the identification of what is now known as Broca's area, a region in the brain closely associated with language production. And Broca's journey into the study of language began with his examination of a patient who was referred to as Tan, due to his ability to produce only the single syllable tan. Broca observed that Tan had lesions on the left frontal lobe of his brain. And this discovery led him to hypothesize a connection between specific brain regions and language deficits. And through careful study and examination of additional patients, Broca identified a consistent pattern in individuals with language production difficulties. He found that lesions in the left posterior frontal lobe, specifically in the inferior frontal gyrus, were associated with a condition known as Brokaw's aphasia or non-fluent aphasia. Individuals with Brokaw's aphasia typically had difficulty forming grammatically correct sentences and expressing themselves fluently. So, between Karl Wernicke and Paul Brokaw, we have this real profound, giant leap forward in understanding of language within the brain. Now, let's turn our attention to the critical question: where in the brain is language housed? Well, we've already seen the key figures that answered that question. The localization of language within the brain has been really a topic of intense investigation for centuries. And the work of Wernicke and Brokaw really set the stage for understanding these various brain regions. So in a broad sense, language processing is predominantly lateralized in the left hemisphere of the brain, particularly in right-handed individuals. However, the story is a little more nuanced, and the different aspects of language are associated with distinct brain regions. So if you recall, just talked about this, there's Brokaw's area, as we discussed, and that's localized in the left posterior parietal lobe, specifically the left inferior frontal gyrus, and that plays a pivotal role in language production. So damage to this area can result in that non-fluent aphasia, where individuals struggle with forming grammatically correct sentences and expressing themselves verbally. And then we have Wernicke's area, situated in the left superior temporal gyrus. And this is central for language comprehension. So damage to Wernicke's area can lead to fluent aphasia, where individuals can produce speech, but often lack meaningful content and may not be comprehensible. Now, there's something that we can call the arcuate fasciitis. Sorry. Oh, it's been a long day. The arcuate fasciculus. There we go. I'm having some language problems today. And these two language areas, the Brokaw's area and Wernicke's area, are interconnected by a bundle of nerve fibers known as the arcuate fasciculus. There we go. I finally got it. And so this bundle serves as a neural pathway that really allows for communication between the areas responsible for language production and comprehension. There's also something known as the angular gyrus, and this is another important region related to language. So within the angular gyrus, which is located in the parietal lobe of all places, it plays a role in reading and writing processes and is involved in the transformation of visual information into language. So it's part of those association zones that we sometimes have within our brain. And so it's important to note that the brain's organization for language can vary to some extent among individuals. So, for example, left-handed individuals may exhibit different patterns of lateralization, while language centers potentially distributed with these people across both hemispheres. But understanding these key brain regions really involved in language processing obviously is crucial for unraveling the complexities of how our brains work and how we communicate and how we think. So as we move through here, hope you see that there are some real intricate pathways that go into this process of understanding and producing language. So let's delve into some of these neural pathways that enable us to understand and produce language. One of the most intriguing aspects of language processing in the brain is the existence of these distinct neural streams. Now, each serving different but interconnected roles in language comprehension and production. So, what I'd like to do now is focus on what we call the dorsal stream of language processing. And the dorsal stream, also sometimes known as the dorsal pathway, and sometimes we call this the WARE pathway, is a neural network that primarily processes the spatial and phonological aspects of language. So this stream is responsible for the mechanics of language, such as understanding the structure of words and sentences, as well as the motor planning required for speech production. And here's some key components and functions of the dorsal stream. As you recall, we had the angular gyrus, and as I've already mentioned, the angular gyrus is in the parietal lobe, is an essential region within that dorsal stream, and it plays a role in reading comprehension, particularly in transforming written words into their spoken forms. There's also something known as the supramarginal gyrus, which is located near the angular gyrus, and the supramarginal gyrus is involved in phonological processing. So it helps us recognize and manipulate the sounds of language, which is crucial for tasks like reading and articulating words correctly. Then we have the posterior superior temporal gyrus, and this region, situated near Wernicke's area, is involved in processing the syntactic and grammatical aspects of language. So it aids in understanding the structure of sentences and the relationship between words within them. And of course, we need to be mindful of the motor cortex. And even though this isn't traditionally considered part of the dorsal stream, the motor cortex in that frontal lobe obviously plays a critical role in speech production, because it's responsible for planning and executing the precise movements required for speaking. So you can think of the dorsal stream is kind of like a conductor of an orchestra. It's coordinating the intricate movements and timing necessary for language production and comprehension. And it really enables us to translate our thoughts into spoken and written words, ensuring that the message that we intend to convey is accurately and fluently, ideally, expressed. And then, of course, there is what we call the ventral stream, which is equally captivating. And just like the ventral stream, we can, the dorsal stream, we call the dorsal stream the dorsal pathway, and we also call it the WARE pathway. With the ventral stream, we can also call this the ventral pathway or the WHAT pathway. And this is another vital neural network within that intricate web of language processing. But unlike the dorsal stream, which is primarily concerned with the phonological and structural aspects of language, the ventral stream is all about the meaning and semantics of language. So here's some components of the ventral stream. Now, as we discussed earlier, Wernicke's area, located in the left superior temporal gyrus, is really that cornerstone of language comprehension, and it's a pivotal hub for the ventral stream because it's responsible for decoding the meaning of spoken and written language. And then we have what is called the fusiform gyrus, which is situated in the temporal lobe, and the fusiform gyrus plays a critical role in recognizing and processing visual stimuli, including written words. And so it's instrumental in word recognition during our reading. Then there's the inferior temporal gyrus, and this region adjacent to the fusiform gyrus is involved in higher level semantic processing. So it helps us understand the meaning of words and concepts and forms connections between different words and their associated meanings. And then we have the anterior cingulate cortex. So while not exclusively part of the ventral stream, this region is associated with monitoring and evaluating language output, ensuring that our speech or writing aligns with our intended message. So you can kind of think of the cingulate gyrus the cingulate cortex as being kind of like our reflection on ourselves, where we can kind of monitor ourselves. So it's kind of like a second person that is listening to what we're saying and judging whether or not it's correct. And that anterior cingulate part of the cortex is what kind of listens to what we say and ensures that what's coming out of our mouth is actually representative of what we actually mean to say. Now, overall, the ventral stream is kind of like the interpreter of language within our brains. It uses the rich tapestry of meanings and associations from words we hear or read, and it's responsible for our ability to comprehend the world around us, to express the abstract ideas that we have in our head, and to convey those nuances that are so important within human communication. Now, let's take a moment and delve into the world of brain-based disorders of language as we kind of close off here. And as I've already mentioned, and we've talked about this quite a bit, there are aphasias. And in this case, we're talking in terms of language aphasias. So if you recall what an aphasia is, it's a condition that disrupts the normal processing and production of language due to brain damage or dysfunction, in the case of language aphasias. And these disorders can result from various causes, like if there's a stroke, or if there's traumatic brain injury, or if there's a tumor or neurodegenerative diseases. Basically, if the parts of the brain that are responsible for language are damaged in some way, then there's going to be a significant disruption either in comprehension or in ability to produce language. So, and we've kind of mentioned these already, but I want to kind of talk about them a little bit a little more clearly. The first one is Brokaw's aphasia, which is that non-fluent aphasia. And so this disorder is associated with clearly damage to Brokaw's area in the left posterior frontal lobe. And so individuals with Brokaw's aphasia typically struggle with forming grammatically correct sentences and often produce speech that is slow and effortful and lacking in fluency. And while they may have intact comprehension, their ability to express themselves verbally is significantly impaired. And often their speech is telegraphic, consisting of essential words and phrases necessary to convey their meaning. And then there is Wernicke's aphasia. We call this fluent aphasia. And we've already discussed Wernicke's aphasia a little bit. This is results from a damage to Wernicke's area in that left superior temporal gyrus, and can lead to Wernicke's aphasia. And in this disorder, individuals produce fluent speech, but have little meaningful content. Their sentences may be grammatically correct, but they often include neologisms, so made-up words, and semantic paraphrasias, so substituting one word for another, and difficulty understanding spoken and written language. And sometimes you have global aphasia, global language aphasia. And global aphasia really is a severe language disorder resulting from extensive damage usually to both Broca's and Wernicke's areas. And individuals with global aphasia have profound deficits in both language comprehension and language production. And they may be limited to using only a few words or gestures to communicate and often struggle to convey even basic messages. And these are just a few examples of the many language disorders that can arise due to brain-based disruptions, but these conditions are illustrative of just how important the specific brain regions are and how they're responsible for language in underscoring the remarkable resilience and adaptability of the human brain. So, I hope you enjoyed our exploration of the language centers of our brain, and I will see you guys next week. You take care. Goodbye.